Welcome back. Now, China wants to increase imports of South Africa's agricultural products, marking a starting point for deeper trade discussions. China has been on a journey to diversify its agricultural exports, and joining us to look into what South Africa stands to gain as a beneficiary of China's diversification strategy is Thabile Nkunjana, senior economist at the Trade Research Unit. Thank you so much for your time, Thabile. I'll just lay the table on China's agricultural importance as a consumer.
No, I mean, China is a well-known, globally player in terms of both in importing and exporting products, particularly those that are manufactured. And of course, for a country like South Africa that wants to sort of expand and diversify its products as much as this China is having the intended, similar, needs to diversify its exports and imports, especially after the tariffs that it has been going on back and forth with the USA. So this provides an opportunity both for South Africa and, of course, for China, and that, of course, includes consumers in both countries. So therefore, this is viewed as a win-win situation, and it is something that South African analysts have always been advocating for. So it's finally appears to be happening now.
Well, what does the current relationship, agricultural relationship between South Africa and China currently look like? And have there been any shifts in dynamics looking at China's economic challenges in the recent years, or maybe even the BRICS partnership between South Africa and China?
So Zanessa, from time to time, the relationship between the two countries is gaining strength every day. And of course, as I said earlier on, that for South Africa, a country that is quite huge when it comes to agricultural products, we have seen China as a market that we have always wanted to get into. Now, and for as far as the relationship in terms of trade, in particularly the agricultural products. South Africa does export a bit of products to China, but those products, they remain minimal. But for those that it buys, for instance, the likes of wool, around 70 to 75% of South Africa's wool does go to China. But given that we have such a huge basket of products that South Africa has that we want to export, and given the size of the market that China is, this is something that all the industries and the sector in large South Africa cannot overlook, and it is something that we are excited about. But of course, the Chinese in that are going to also benefit, because South Africa has quite a vast of products that we want to export, and China is a market that needs those products that you want to sell.
Yes, it sounds easy and quite straightforward, looking at the fact that we also have to diversify our imports away from the US. And of course, there's a lot of space for China to take up more of our products. But are there any, just as we're starting off these conversations, any regulatory conversations that need to be had in terms of making this path smoother?
Yeah, absolutely, is that because, for instance, if we are to compare for countries that already supply China with products, those countries, they have relatively lowest restrictions as far as tariffs are concerned compared to South Africa. And one of those products that we have always advocated for, it is South African wine. And we have to, if we are to sell our wine to China, we have to compete with the likes of Australia, quite a big player that has always been there. A lion market for China. So therefore, and also the sanitary requirements that, we always wanted to be also addressed. So if those issues, particularly the tariffs, can be reduced for the top products, including wine, that, as I said earlier on, then of course we have the huge products, that is citrus, which includes, lemons, oranges, and so forth. So those are some of the issues that have always been the hindrance for South Africa to join that market. But now, since these talks have been initiated, it's very likely that we'll see some changes there. And of course, it looks like Chinese are in the table to talk about this. So it's something that is positive, and we're thinking that both those tariffs will be reduced, and perhaps there's some measures that have been put into place to some products are going to be sort of adjusted if there's a need. But South Africa is always known to have quite products that are of world standards. So therefore, we are not afraid that we'll be able to meet those standards.
Well, as we're talking about this diversification drive for South Africa with the difficulties that we're due to face in the US, and now we're talking about diversifying to China, just in general, in the current landscape, what opportunities exist for South Africa to diversify and increase that runway in terms of selling its agricultural products globally?
It's such a big it's a big take for instance for South Africa, because for instance we have had some of the products that have been concentrated very much so to the US as a market, and of course the recent tariffs that were announced by President Trump not so long ago, that triggered some fear across the sector, especially for the industries that have a lot of their products concentrated to that market. And it calls for diversification, something that even our senior principals, even at a political level, that's something that they observe, that South Africa really needs to make sure that it diversifies its products so that should a problem or any shock that is related to trade cannot have such an impact. And now with this opportunity that China is bringing to the table, it's an opportunity, particularly for citrus. We have some closer to 1 billion of our citrus products that we're going to US. Now with China opening this door, so that shock will probably sort of be cushioned should we be able to get that market in China. And of course, then that will mean we're not going to be so reliant to the likes of US and other markets that South Africa tend to have some higher concentration of its products. But in general, it's a good development. For any country that is export led like South Africa, so it is really something that will help the industry grow. For instance, now we are quite a huge player from the global standing. We're within the 35 leading countries to export agricultural products in the world, and only the country in Africa. So that's huge in itself, and it's gonna even be more, put into place now should we be gaining such markets like China or even the likes of India if we were to move to other bigger markets.
And that's the thing. I'm hoping that these conversations with China will spark more interest from the other BRICS countries so that we can diversify to them and also expand our supply to those markets as well. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your insights, Thabile. Really appreciate it. That was Thabile Nkunjana, Senior Economist at the Trade Research Unit.